Thought I had a 30-second counter. I guess I forgot to turn that on. Welcome back to the Death by Tyranny podcast. Couldn't sleep. All the kids got up extra early today, so just thought I'd hop on here. I was watching a pretty decent video by Vincent James. You can find him on quite a few underground social media platforms, but Cozy.tv is definitely the one that I prefer. It's got a little bit better user interface. Now, he was on YouTube for quite a while, but you don't see him on there anymore because he's been banned. And now he does talk about some pretty controversial topics, but so do I. And maybe I'll end up that way at some point. Maybe I'm just not big enough to really turn heads at this point in time, but the last video Vince did September 30th, he went over quite a few articles, bringing kind of back up this idea in America that racism is fully alive and minorities are constantly under attack. And he always does a pretty good job of kind of dispelling these narratives in articles. And not only does he do that, because I think a lot of people will say that, it's nonsense, but the best part about Vince is he actually goes on to show the complete opposite is actually what's happening. Um, One of the bigger statistics is the interracial hate crime numbers and for the percentage of the population of who's committing the most hate crime versus the other. It's a pretty shocking statistic. I don't think it is to people that really pay attention past the 7 o'clock news. It's actually pretty obvious for the ones who have to go into their inner city on a daily basis or a weekly basis how lopsided our society has become when we're talking about uh, just multiple racial factors taking into account of one another, which ones get picked up by the media and which ones are just we've grown into normality. It's actually disgusting if you really think about it. It's also my oldest and only son's birthday today, and I like to try to get a good grasp on what's going on in the world. Obviously, this being my firstborn, this was a pretty big event in my life. He was born in 2009, and I know that a lot of people maybe only can recall the financial crisis that are being brought up at this very moment because of how poorly the Biden administration is leading our country economically. But I actually remember it quite well. I think a lot of us that are blessed with children remember what it was like to have our first, and we kind of, if we go on to have more children or just to watch the one and only grow older, we kind of base where we're at in life, our journey, how much we've grown. And I can tell you, in 2009, I wasn't really doing the best. Uh, and I don't just mean stock market wise or how much my house was worth. I actually didn't even own a house. I was making barely over minimum wage, struggled quite a bit. And even though I've been very, very blessed to rise my economical level, my financial ability, I can tell you it's starting to feel more and more every day like it did in 2009. Now, I know minimum wage has raised quite a bit since then, but comparatively, I make quite a bit more than what minimum wage is. But for whatever reason, it still feels like I'm on the lower half of the poverty line. And it's funny because just a few short years ago, it didn't feel like that. It felt like I was actually beginning to make it somewhere in life, to the point where instead of worrying week by week how I was going to pay my bills, I was actually starting to devise a plan on how I was going to live the rest of my life, what I was going to do uh, for my children's futures. And it's crazy how a lot of people say you can't really get a good, grasp on what the who is in the White House and what they are doing for the country because they're only in there for such a short amount of time. And I beg to differ. I think there is arguments to be made that a president could be in the White House a little bit longer, but it's almost a very scary idea that if we were to have someone like Biden in there for longer than 4 years, the total and utter destruction that just one administration can actually do. Now, if we have somebody in there like Trump, who is actually fighting for our country in a neutral direction for all religions and ethnicities, then it looks a little bit more hopeful. But we have actually, I think, been blessed with being able to see exactly how the 1% and the politicians of our country feel about 90% of the population of the United States. They don't want us to be happy or prosper. That is why they have fought so hard to get Trump out of the White House and now to keep him from running for the White House again. And I think we all need to really keep that in mind. If you are going to try to keep the hope alive at the voting booth, then we must at the same time constantly remind people of the destruction they have done when they have voted the wrong way. I know there are plenty of people out there that are hopeful that we can have these political conversations and that the the best way to live our lives politically is down straight straight down the center. But that's not true. The center line has led our conservative portion of this country down a dark path, further and further from religions that have allowed us to prosper and even be where we are today. And I think it is also just as important to point out to all the people. I hear this all the time. People that say they are very disappointed with the Biden administration, but they would vote for him again in a heartbeat. And that's just absurd to me. Here we are in the year 2022 when humanity is supposed to be at its furthest point and growing. And yet, we are as close as we've ever been to nuclear war. That should really tell you something about this administration. And if you are paying attention to the nuances back and forth between Russia and what this deranged old man in the White House has been saying, they are most definitely not trying to take charge and take control. And they are definitely not trying to de escalate at the same time. In fact, it's almost as if the Democrats that are controlling our country at the moment are egging Russia on to try to convince them to use nuclear weapons. Now, I know what is showed in mainstream might seem a different path than that, but if you really start to put the pieces of the puzzle together, it all starts to make sense. And it really shows the political stupidity of the people that said they're disappointed in Biden, but they would do it again. I know a lot of people still to this day believe that Trump had some type of illegal terroristic connection with Russia, but that's only because the Democratic Party has such an obsession with Russia. Almost the same obsession that they have with President Trump. And the one with Trump is fairly easy to diagnose. He is teaching people to be independent of the global world order. He is trying to take that center line and shift it more to the conservative space politically. So it's pretty obvious why the Democratic Party would be completely and utterly against Trump. Why they are against Russia is a little bit harder to understand. Now, a lot of people probably have heard the latest speech that Putin gave about the Western world and how it is poisoning our youth, along with the world's youth, with this gender dysphoria. And they're not wrong. I mean, pretty much everything I heard Putin said was true. You know, there might have been a thing or two in there that I disagreed with, but it didn't mean that it wasn't true. How the Western world and America has begun to push this liberal agenda across oceans into other countries where it is not welcome, and finds any and every way to shut down and destroy an economy that disagrees with them. Russia's not wrong there. And so, them pointing that out, Putin in particularly, pointing that out, shouldn't be surprising either. Of course, you have to understand that it's a little bit surface level for the Democrats. They're they're trying to push this idea that the reason that they must control and fight off Russia is on some type of moral obligation, but it's very much simpler than that. If you look at all of the taxpayer dollars that have been given to Ukraine, a lot of that money does not leave the United States. With the 20-year war on terror, the global war on terror ending, you are starting to see the military shift into new development so they can continue to keep those budgets as high as they were during peak wartime in a peacetime. And now that the federal government must find another way to dwindle and piss away the taxpayer payer dollar, they must do the same. And it's pretty obvious that the US population, for the most part, has grown a very obvious distaste for wars that are senseless and cannot be easily explained. So they have to make Russia the boogeyman. No matter what truth lies beneath the surface, we will never know that. Our media, our federal government will only ever let us believe that Russia must be stopped at all cost, because if they forget to do that or have a moment where they lapse in their effort to do this, people are going to be fairly irate that the amount of tax dollars going into Ukraine and not being kept here at home in such a horrific economical time is going to grow overwhelming. And it should really show you how little this administration cares about its people to continue to escalate a war that we have no business rightfully being in, to the point where we have agitated Putin directly, calling for his death if he is to continue to do what he is doing. At every chance that the Biden administration has had to de escalate the situation, they have escalated it. They have sent more taxpayer dollars, uh, and not directly to Ukraine. But if you've never quite understood the definition of money laundering, that is exactly what is going on in our federal government today, especially when it comes to the money that is being set aside for Ukraine. So, to continue to do this, to continue to tear away the financial freedom from the civilian population of America, they have to continue this propaganda against Russia. And as much as they would really try to beat it into your head that this is a holy war on which they are on the right side of history, that's just not the case. And they aren't even allowing us to comprehend the information that would allow us to make that decision. And that is why it is so easy to distinguish and see that this is purely about laundering money out of the taxpayer's pocket into the politician's hand. It is just that simple. And to understand that this is furthering a divide between Americans. How many conversations have you seen on social media where someone has gotten into it with another over Ukraine and Russia, not even understanding that it is far, far more simpler than that? That this is a escalation of greed, and that's really it. And if I can really drive anything into uh, out of my head and into yours today, it's that try to pick some moments throughout your year where you sit down and actually pay attention to what's going on in the world and in your country, in your community, so that when the next year comes, you can truly understand if you are in a better position or if you're in a worse position. And I hope for everyone that they are in a better position year over year. But that doesn't necessarily mean that there are going to be elements of our life that are out of our control. I mean, obviously, Biden winning the election, if you want to say that, was out of my control. I would have much rather not been this close to nuclear war and economical collapse. I would have much rather felt like I am not below the poverty rate, even though I make a significant amount above, the I guess hourly, minimum. So just keep that in mind, and maybe today isn't that day for you. And if you have children, I think it's fairly easy to kind of pinpoint a spot or a day in your year, in your year to do this year over year. Uh, it's going to be a short one, guys. Like I said, I just got and woke up earlier than normal. It's my son's birthday, so I can't go back to sleep and just oversleep. Hope everybody has a great day today. Stay safe, stay prepared. God bless. America first. Peace, y'all.